Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books. Books that I have read and authors I've interviewed. And today we are joined by Abbott Kahler. What a book she has written. It's called Eden, Eden, Eden Undone. That's right. It's all about sex, love, murder, excitement, all in the Galapagos Islands. It is a true story. That's right, and there's nothing fictional about this. It is a true story. It is so bizarre. It is so wild. You're gonna love this book is a page turner of the year, folks. I went through this one Sunday afternoon. I just couldn't stop. I kept saying, "Well, I'll finish that chapter." Well, then I got to do the next chapter, and before you know it, there are no more chapters left. But it is a wonderful book. Abbott is a fantastic writer. We're going to get into why she had to change her name at the age of 40. That's an interesting story in and of itself, but the story of these people who left their homes over in Europe to come to the Galapagos Islands in search of Utopia and what happened when they got there. It is a fantastic, I'm tell you what, I can't say enough good things about this book. So rather than me say it, let's go right to that interview with Abbott Kahler. All right, friends, we're joined today by Abbott Kahler, who's coming to us from New York City and going to be talking about her newest book, Eden Undone. Welcome to Books and Looks.
Thanks so much for having me, Blaine.
All right. Before we start the book, I have a lot of your other books, and they're all done under the name Karen Abbott. What happened to Karen Abbott, and how did you become Abbott Kahler?
Well, it's kind of a bizarre backstory. The first thing that happened was I got an email from a reader back in 2013 that says, "Do you know if you Google yourself, it says you died in 2010." So I did not know this. I Google myself, and sure enough, my photograph pops up, my alma mater, and it says died 2010. And it was super creepy. And I was like, have I been like weekend at birdieing for the last few years? And I didn't even know about it. And so at that time, I had been writing a novel, and I was thinking about using a different name for my novel anyway. And at that time, I was also about to turn 40. So I was ripe for a midlife crisis. So I don't know what, I just got a whim and I went to the New York courthouses and I did the whole process and I legally changed my name to Abbott Kahler. A lot of my old friends had already called me Abbott, so it wasn't too much of a leap into my personal life, at least. And I was fine. I was publishing more books under Karen Abbott. And then suddenly the name Karen becomes a slur that means a racist old white lady. And it was very disconcerting. I actually was on the cover of a New York Post talking about this phenomenon that, of course, affects millions of innocent women who are not racist white ladies named Karen. And also a lot of, a couple black women I know who are named Karen. It just sort of became a name with negative connotations. And I worried about that a little bit, and especially with regard to trying to reach younger readers who might be like, "Oh, I'm not going to read a book by a racist white lady." Also, by that time, my name had been Abbott Kahler for 10 years, and I published a novel under that name. And I just was like, maybe this is just time to change it, and I did, and I spent a couple years laying the groundwork for that change. Posting about it and talking about the story, and so that's what happened.
I did not know that information about the name Karen. That's news to me. Okay. Yeah, I didn't realize that. Okay.
Yeah, and also it's kind of writing nonfiction. I think it helps in a way to have a gender neutral name. Women mostly buy books, but I think if men are going to buy a book, it's nonfiction, and I think there's a subconscious bias about reading books by women.
Lately, I can't get anything but books by women. I feel like every author I'm interviewing is a woman. I tell you, it's you guys are tremendous. I love it. Now, I have these other books, okay, and they're by Karen Abbott, and I'm assuming they're going to come back out and reprints and new editions. Are they going to say Karen Abbott? Or are they going to flip over to Abbott Kahler?
As far as I know, they're staying under Karen Abbott, and that's fine. That's fine for me. I still answer to Karen Abbott. I'm still happy to obviously talk about all those books and all of that. But I think it's just it kind of cleaved my life in two with the name, and they're not gonna redo that.
Yeah. Good for you. All right. That's a leap, though, when you're 40 years old to change your name, isn't it?
At that time, it was kind of freeing for me. I also found out that my this is like a lot of information, but I found out the man who raised me wasn't my biological father. I was going through a kind of a whole, identity overhaul in a way, in the most dramatic of ways, and it just sort of felt right for me to do something drastic.
Good for you. I'll tell you. Wow. Okay. When did you decide that you wanted to be a writer of books? Okay. And what drew you to nonfiction books?
Fiction had always been my first interest. When I was a kid, I wrote books, and they were kind of weird. When I was 12 and 13, I'd be sending murder mysteries about, evil ladies and evil women spies to Ellery Queen Mystery Magazine and Alfred Hitchcock. Nothing ever got published, shockingly. But it was my passion even when I was a kid. And then I ended up falling into journalism kind of by accident. I got an internship at Philadelphia Magazine, and really just fell in love with journalism then. The idea that you could uh, basically take over somebody else's life for a period of time. I mean, I really got immersed with my subjects. I like to write long profiles. And fortunately, I came of age at a time when they had the bandwidth to do that. Print magazines let you write 10,000 word profiles. From there, I, just sort of told myself I was a nonfiction writer. When I moved to Atlanta, I left Philadelphia. I was looking around for a book idea and came across a story of my great grandmother and her sister who emigrated from Slovenia back in 1905. And the sister went to Chicago and was never heard from again. And I had always been intrigued and haunted by this bit of family lore, and I started thinking about it, and I started looking into what was going on in Chicago during that time period. And instead, I didn't find anything out about my ancestor really, but I found out about these two mysterious Southern sisters who ran the world's most famous brothel in Chicago at that time period, and the sort of nationwide effort to shut them down and what that meant in the country. And that was my first book. That was Sin in the Second City. And I just went on from there.
Wow. Well, now we're not talking about these other books, but what are some of the other nonfiction books you have written? Because once you read one, you want to get them all.
Oh, thank you. My second one was about Gypsy Rose Lee, who was a burlesque star and a literary person in New York society circles back in the 30s and 40s and later. And it wasn't a biography to me. It was sort of a look at American entertainment through the 20th century. I mean, she was sort of a microcosm of that. Then it was female Civil War spies, which was fascinating. Then it was George Remus, who was America's most successful bootlegger. Nobody's heard of him. Everybody's heard of Al Capone, but George Remus was a character in Boardwalk Empire and had this great story where his wife fell in love with a federal prohibition agent and a female district attorney brought him down. It was a really dramatic and he was a fascinating man. And of course, then I wrote a novel, which was inspired by a true story. It's called Where You End, and it's the story of identical twins, and one of whom suffers a very bizarre case of amnesia and the hijinks that arise from that. And then there's Eden Undone, which is what we're here to talk about today. And I think the most fun I've had writing any book of all of them.
Wow. Why did you switch to that fiction all of a sudden?
Well, I've always wanted to get back to fiction. It was my first interest, and it was during the pandemic. I had started on Eden Undone, but then the archives closed, and I couldn't go to Galapagos. I couldn't go to the archives, and I needed to do something. So I wrote a novel. Yeah, but I do. I'm going to write another novel. I'm under contract for it, so I'm thinking about that now.
Good. All right. Well, Eden Undone, as it says, it's a true story. Yes, friends, a true story of sex, murder, and striving for utopia. How did you discover this story? And tell me how extensive this research had to be.
Well, I actually have been wanting to write this story for 12 years. I mean, this has been something that's been on my mind for a very long time. And it started back in, I think it was 2012. I was researching another possible idea, and I came across a headline, a 1941 headline in the San Francisco Examiner, And it was so strange that I was immediately intrigued. And the headline reads in part, quote, "Was Dr. Ritter with his steel teeth poisoned in paradise? Was the Baroness, otherwise known as Crazy Panties, who ruled the island with a gun in love, murdered by one of her love slaves after she had driven the other to his death?" And it was the kind of headline where you sort of have to read it a couple times to make sure it's really what you read. And after spending a couple days in the archives confirming that Crazy Panties did indeed embody her nickname, I decided that this was the book I wanted to write. And I went to my publisher at the time, and they said no. They said, "You write American history, you write American characters. This is not really in par with what you've been doing, and we don't want you to do it." So years passed, I wrote other books, but I always remembered this story, and I was sort of desperate to tell it. And finally, in 2019, I took the publisher of Crown, my imprint at Penguin Random House, out for drinks and begged him. And I said, "Look, this isn't a European story. This isn't an American story. This is a human story. Who among us hasn't wanted to abandon our lives and go flee somewhere for simpler, greener pastures or a simpler life, a place where we could start over and run away from all of our mistakes?" And he understood that. Everybody has felt that. And, of course, everybody also realizes that wherever you go, there you are. You bring your problems with you. And I think that's exactly what the people in my book discovered.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, now this takes place, friends, it's in the Galapagos Islands. I mean, of all the places, the Galapagos. Now, for those who might not know where the Galapagos are, and there's some of us who are not geographically challenged, where are they? How many islands are in the Galapagos, and what islands specifically are we dealing with?
The Galapagos Islands are off the coast of Ecuador. And there's dispute about exactly how many, depending on your qualifications for how you define an island. But the island I focused on was in the southern part of the archipelago down. It's called Floriana, and it's about 67 square miles. And when you think about the Galapagos, just to give you an idea, it's not the glittering golden shores, waving palm trees, idyllic, lush vegetation type of place. They sprung up from volcanoes. These are volcanic islands. They're covered in lava rock. Many of them are barren. They're ugly. They're sterile. Charles Darwin, of course, made the Galapagos famous in his 1830 expedition, 1835. And he talked about how sterile and barren they were. And later explorers, would say things like, the Galapagos looks like something that Lucifer himself heaved out of hell and just threw up there. And so it's not really the place that you might think of escaping to a tropical paradise. It's a challenge. So the people who wanted to go here wanted a challenge.
Wow, I never realized. I thought there are like 4 islands in the Galapagos. I had no idea. And, it's all I guess it's all pretty much all protected now. Back in the days when this was set, were those protections for the wildlife and the flora and the fauna, were those in place back then?
Oh, absolutely not. There's no sense of conservation. And when you read my book, you kind of marvel at what some of the American explorers, how they collect these animals, they bring them back to aquariums and zoos, having no idea how to care for them, taking them out of their natural habitat. And to me, it sort of became a metaphor. They took these animals out of their natural habitat, and they don't fare so well. And then at the same time, you're taking these humans out of their natural habitat in Germany, putting them on a remote island in the Galapagos, and they don't fare very well either. So to me, it just became a sort of interesting comparison.
Yeah. Well, now there are 3 different groups of people who come to the island at different times. Tell us who they are, where they came from, and why did they come to the Galapagos?
We start off with a man named Dr. Frederick Ritter, who's this very eccentric doctor in Berlin. He's about 40 years old. He is a World War I veteran, which really changed him. I think he had post traumatic stress disorder. And after the war, he started leaning into these very, in some ways, progressive medical ideas, the importance of raw food, the healing benefits of water, the healing powers of the mind, and that kind of thing. But he took things a little far. He did not trust anything civilization had to offer. He would not wear clothes made by civilization or shoes made by civilization. He ate porridge that he would make in his own apartment because he didn't trust food, that anybody else made. So he was really, verging on the edge of being a sort of fanatical. I guess he was fanatical in his beliefs. And he's working at this hospital in Berlin, and he meets a woman named Dory Strach. She's a bit younger than him. She's 26 years old, and she's suffering from multiple sclerosis, and he's treating her for this condition. Of course, every other doctor told Dory that her condition was incurable. But Frederick says, you know what? You are choosing to be ill. You are choosing to be sick. You can cure your MS just through the power of your mind. And while this was absurd, Dory was intrigued by this idea. I should say that both of them were married to other people. And Dory, they looked at it as an escape. They began talking about escaping together. And Frederick was interested in sort of pursuing his philosophical ideas, and Dory said she would be his ideal helpmate, and she would devote her life to spreading his ideas throughout the world. And Frederick became so committed to island life that he actually extracted all of his teeth and had them replaced by a set of steel dentures before leaving for the island. So they were committed, and they picked Floriana because it was uninhabited. They didn't want anybody else around them, and it had one freshwater spring. So there was a chance for vegetation to grow. They could try to cultivate a garden, and off they went in 1929.
Wow. And there's a story, I think, about how Dory even lines up a new wife for her husband.
Yeah.
He didn't want to let her go, but then he got a housekeeper. What's just a little bit about that?
Oh, I mean, it's even stranger than that. Dory and Frederick arranged for their spouses to live together. So their jilted spouses are going to live together after these two set off for the Galapagos. It's an arrangement that doesn't last very long, but they were agreeable to it. It just makes you wonder, like, these two spouses seemed very eager to get rid of Dory and Frederick. They were all too happy to sort of accommodate that strange arrangement. So that's what happened. And Dory and Frederick take off and try to start anew.
Okay. Well, now they're there, and the next thing we have some visitors coming, and there's another set of people who come to the island. Who are they, and what's their story?
These people come. If I could just interject about the American explorers for a second. Dory and Frederick were, trying to, build their life. They're settling in. They create this house for themselves named Frida, which is a combination of their names, Frederick and Dory. They are intermittently getting along. Dory is striving to be the helpmate she wants Frederick to help Frederick. And he's kind of cruel and dismissive of her. And she's starting to get a little bit sick of this. So there's a tension in the relationship. One of my favorite Dory quotes is that she says, quote, "I think I'm the only woman that Frederick did not truly despise," which gives you a little bit of an idea of not only his feelings about women, but the tenor of their relationship. So in January of 1930, an American explorer named Eugene McDonald shows up. He's from Chicago. He is the founder of Zenith Radio. He's kind of a eccentric guy in his own right. And he had gone down there to search for treasure and to search for animals and just to explore. This is what wealthy Americans were doing during the onset of the Great Depression. They all just started traveling elsewhere. And he's shocked to find Dory and Frederick living there. He gives them food, he gives them seeds, he gives them some tools, he gives them floor polish, and of course makes the joke that I don't know what a guy like Frederick's going to do with floor polish unless he wants to polish his steel teeth. But he goes back to America and reports to newspapers across the country, it gets picked up around the world, that there's a quote, modern day Adam and Eve living on this island in the Galapagos. So word gets out. People are fascinated by this. And there's a family in Germany who are particularly intrigued by this idea. It is Margaret and Heinz Whitmer. They're not actually married. They're also both married to other people. And Heinz has a 12-year-old son from his first marriage. And Heinz was also a World War One veteran, also traumatized. And he had also been a high ranking official in the Weimar Republic. So, of course, Hitler at this time is gaining power. He's sort of ascending. So Heinz's political enemies are starting to, gain power, and he really wants to escape. So they decide to follow in Dr. Ritter and Dory's footsteps and go to Floriana. And by the time they arrive, Margaret is 5 months pregnant, which does not please Ritter because he's thinking, I escaped Berlin. I closed my medical practice and I don't want to be a doctor anymore. And now here these people show up expecting me to administer medical care.
Were they married by the time were the Whitworths married when they got to the island, or were they still married to their first?
Oh, they're still married to their first spouses. They don't actually get legally married till much later. And that's something that actually had never been reported before. Everybody always thought they were married. So I
Okay.
found out they weren't. Yeah.
All right. So, now we got the 2 of them. Now we got those 2 groups here. Now we've got maybe the most bizarre group coming. Tell us about the Baroness. Who is the Baroness and what's her story?
Well, the Baroness, her real name was Antonia Wagner von Wehrbaum Basquet. It's quite a mouthful. And if anybody's ever heard anything about this story, there's been a few podcasts about it. Um, Everybody always says she's a self-proclaimed baroness. She's a so-called baronet. She actually was a real baronet. I hired somebody in Vienna to do her genealogy, and she acquired the title for her grandfather, who became a baron from his bravery during the Austro-Prussian War. Um, so she's in Paris when this happens. The depression is just starting to affect Paris. She is in this fantastic orgiastic, which is her words, culture, gallivanting around with socialites every day, seducing men and women alike, partying. She's married to a French war hero, but she has lovers that she constantly rotates, and really just does whatever she pleases. And at this time, this is 1932, she claims that a voice belonging to God told her to go to the Galapagos Island and conquer it. The Galapagos was hers. And she decides to take 2 of her lovers and move to Floriada Island. And as soon as she arrives there, the first thing she does is wash her feet in the Whitmer's drinking water. And the second thing she does is to announce that she wants to turn Floriana into Miami. She's going to build a luxury hotel to cater to American millionaires and going to become the next great Miami style destination. And of course, this does not please Ritter or anybody, or, her more privacy minded companions are not thrilled about these plans and about this woman.
She's from Vienna. We have the 2 from Ger what is it about that area? Germans, Viennese, why do they wanna escape? That's interesting.
Well, I think at this time too, I wouldn't say this was the Baroness's motivation. She actually claimed to be an intimate of Hitler's, and her brother became a Nazi. Uh, but then again, one of her lovers was Jewish. Her favorite lover was Jewish. So, she's kind of all over the place. But there was turmoil. There was complete chaos and unrest in Germany, as in the rest of Europe. Um, I think just the idea of escaping that was something that was, as sort of an attractive dream for everybody.
Well, now, when they get there, this island is uninhabited as far as we know, but it's never been uninhabited. There are other people who've been there before, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, Floriana has a very dark and interesting history. It was the Galapagos' first penal colony. It had been a passageway for pirates throughout the centuries, marauders. There had been a dictator who lived there for a while, a murderous dictator. And its first inhabitant was a pirate named Patrick Watkins, who was rumored to just stumble around drunk all the time. He killed anybody who came across his path. He was covered in vermin. He was sort of terrifying. And, when Dory and Frederick first arrived, they actually lived in the pirate caves, as they're known, where Patrick Watkins made his home. And Dory was convinced that Floriana was haunted and its evil spirits were going to come for them one way or another. But it was uninhabited when they showed up. A group of Norwegian settlers had tried to make a life there, but failed miserably. So when Dory and Frederick arrived, they also have to contend with the fact that their predecessors did not fare well. And there's just sort of the feeling of, they're really going to attempt something that not nobody has been able to do before.
Yeah. Hmm. Wow. Well, they get there, and you know, I always wondered, do you think they lived as husband and wife? I mean, do you think they were intimate, Dorian? Because there seemed to be a lot of friction from day one.
Yeah. Oh, I think goes back and forth. I mean, I think Frederick was a man of hearty appetites. I will say that. I think that of course they had their moments of compassion and mutual affection. But I will say too that at some point, things devolved pretty badly for them. And there's also, it seems, from my research, that it's possible that Frederick and possibly even Heinz Whitmer, the nice family man, also had flings with the Baroness.
Whoa. Okay. Well, there you go. There are 11 people, friends, on this island. The island is 67 square miles, not the nicest place, but 11 people cannot get along together. They're always stumbling into each other and imposing. And then at other times, they tried to help each other out. It was a very complex arrangement, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, because at some point, Frederick and Heinz, they did not get off on the right foot. Frederick, as I said, resented the idea that he was going to have to deliver Margaret's baby and tend to that. But they sort of, develop an uneasy peace. Frederick is always asking Heinz for cuts of meat, which Heinz and Margaret laugh at because Frederick is an avowed vegetarian. Why does the vegetarian keep asking for meat? And Frederick, of course, comes up with the excuse that he wants to feed it to his chickens. But it's, they sort of, but after the Baroness arrives, they band together. They're like, this woman is absolutely nuts and she's going to drive us off the island if we don't do something about it. So they actually at one point write a letter to the governor of the Galapagos and say, this woman belongs in a sanitarium. She is, quote, ready for all crimes, which is one of my favorite quotes in the book. And would the governor please come and do something about her?
Very interesting what happened and how that got resolved. But, you know, that's one of the things I found fascinating here, Abbott, is that Friedrich especially wants to be out there, Utopia, by himself, but he keeps writing letters to people. He keeps sending notes to people,
Yeah.
which people keep, reading, responding, coming with people. Why did he do that if he wanted to be by himself?
Well, I think there's two things going on there. I think number one, Frederick was a hypocrite of the highest order. I mean, he professed to want to be alone and live off the land and be self-sustaining and become an Ubermensch, and the idea of Nietzsche. He's a big Nietzsche fan. But at the same time, as you said, he wanted to be famous. He wanted his ideas to be spread throughout the world. He wanted everybody to know his name. He wrote articles for the Atlantic that he wanted to be published in America. The other thing was he made very good friends with another American explorer. This is George Allen Hancock. He becomes very important to the story. He's a Los Angeles oil mogul. If anybody's familiar with the La Brea tar pit, his family owned that. Hancock Park is named after him today. And he becomes sort of a confidant to Frederick. And Frederick writes him these really heartfelt letters saying, you know my soul better than anyone else. I'm bearing my soul to you. I need you here. I need you to tell me, tell me I'm not crazy. I need your help. And Hancock keeps coming. And every time Hancock makes a trip to the Galapagos, more people hear about it. So it's just sort of a cycle that perpetuates and feeds itself.
Right, and he keeps bringing more supplies for Friedrich and I guess for others too. He brings supplies all the time when he comes there.
Yeah, and that becomes a source of contention among everybody because they start fighting over the supplies. And again, goes back to the hypocrisy. Oh, here we are wanting to be self-sustaining, living off the land, but please bring us all the comfort. When Frederick and Dory first arrived in the island, he chastised her for missing the comforts of Europe. And then here we are with Frederick, asking for gardening tools and dynamite and all kinds of things, cloth and material. And so it just sort of, he becomes more and more of a hypocrite.
Yeah. Well, now we know that Friedrich tried to communicate with the people, but and I forgot to maybe I didn't ask this question. What about this mailbox on the island? Tell us about the mailbox.
Oh, yeah, it's a fascinating little artifact. So, back in the age of whalers, when whalers would pass through the Galapagos and stop by Floriana, there was a mailbox barrel erected on the bay there, Post Office Bay, it's called now. And basically, people who were on the island or passing through the island would leave a letter in the barrel, and ships that were heading in that direction would pick up the mail and deliver it. And of course, you could imagine this would take a long time. You might not get mail for months and months, but that was their method of sending mail. That was the fastest way they could do it.
Now, when George Hancock came, was he there to collect specimens, initially? Was he there to get the animals, the flora, the fauna? What brought him down there initially to get to, Floriana?
Yeah, absolutely. Hancock had always been interested in oceanic travel. He had several yachts built specifically for this purpose. His most recent yacht was state of the art. I mean, it had everything a scientific laboratory on land might want to have in terms of collecting and preserving and gathering and keeping animals, intact, I guess, before they could go on to their destination. And that was his big plan. But of course, once he met these human beings, I think he thought, oh, here are the most exotic specimens of all these human beings who sort of inhabited this island, and he really gets caught up in the murder mystery.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fascinating. Now, um, there's a penguin. There's a famous penguin also. Tell us about that story.
So this was Vincent Astor, who was another, of course, famous American who came to the islands. He also had been interested in oceanic travel and was surprised to find people there. But while he was on the islands, he picked up a penguin, which are, half the size of their Arctic counterparts. These are tropical penguins. He names the penguin Paddle Wing, and he brings it back to the United States, takes it to New York, gives it a ride in his limousine around Broadway, with the crowds watching and waving. Brings the penguin up to his office, on the elevator where the penguin sits for a press interview. And the descriptions of how blasé this penguin are, it's pretty hilarious. He just sort of takes it all in stride. But he gets shipped off to an aquarium, of course, where people just don't know how to care for him.
Wow. The penguin dies, I think, doesn't he?
The penguin does die, yes, and, I know, and, I it's again, it just brings me back to that metaphor of, taking people and animals out of their natural any kind of animal, people or animals, out of their natural habitats, is, a recipe for disaster.
Well, and that's interesting. It's fascinating how many people, I'm assuming it happened before these people, would come down to the Galapagos and raid the Galapagos of the animals that were there, and with no thought about it. And I remember one thing where some turtles that were, I guess, Floriana turtles ended up on another island because the humans took the turtles and put them somewhere else.
Yeah.
Why can't we keep our hands off of things?
I don't know. I mean, and at one point, Floriana did have turtles. They were extinct on Floriana by the time Dory and Frederick showed up. The attraction of turtles was that they could live on a ship for months and months and months. They could just, they would live and they were great for meat. People would eat them. And I mean, they were just captured in such quantities that they went extinct on Floriana.
Hmm. Well, when the Baroness came, she also brought, was that an Ecuadorian architect with her?
Yeah. So she had made the acquaintance of an Ecuadorian man in Paris. He had been living there. And she decided, well, he would be the perfect man to come to Floriana with her. And he would be able to speak the language, and he would know how to get the proper materials, and he would know how to actually build a house. And things are, he's fine for a while. But like all things with the Baroness, that relationship soon sours.
Hmm. He wasn't one of her lovers, was he?
That's a good question. He very well could have been. Uh, I don't. I mean, I think she basically tried to seduce or did seduce everybody in her path. One American tourist to Floriana who stayed at her hotel called it a festering sex complex. So that just gives you an idea of the of the activity going on there. Yeah.
Wow. Now she built a hotel, but okay, what type of hotel is and what was it look like? Were there any pictures ever taken of this place or description?
Yeah. So there's actually a couple pictures of it in the book. If you buy the book, you'll see them. And it's her hotel was called Hacienda Paradiso. So House of Paradise, and it was, I she apparently it looked better and sometimes than others. At its very best, it was covered in exotic silks and rugs, and she had made kind of a cozy cottage situation out of it. There was a phonograph. There was sort of a dance floor area. So she did her best with the limited materials one might have on Floriana. And she had a garden that she was cultivating. But at the same time, I think she wasn't very clean. There were a couple of visitors who who remarked on the fact that she could maybe step up the housekeeping efforts a little bit.
One of the things that you mentioned, a while ago was about, the first ones, Friedrich and Dory, and wanna live in the land, and that initial crops they had were tremendous. I mean, they were remarking about how great they were, how quickly they grew, but then something happened. Eh, did they always have a problem after that with the crops?
Yeah, so, I mean, the weather, they this is the thing about Floriana, the weather was unpredictable. It does have seasons. There's a rainy season, there's a dry season, but they're really at the whim of that, and, they only have this one freshwater spring, which everybody was sharing, piping it down to different areas, and, it's the at one point, in the pivotal moment in the book, there's a severe drought that stretches on for many, many months, which basically wipes out everybody's garden almost entirely. Dead animal carcasses are dotting the landscape. People are suffering. And you can imagine this is the point where the tensions really start ratcheting up.
Wow. Now the Baroness, again, we gotta go back to her because she is something else. They made a movie about her with her on the island, if I'm not mistaken. Tell us a little bit about that story.
The Baroness, probably not surprisingly, always had a dream of being a Hollywood movie star. And she thought that Captain Hancock, the Los Angeles guy, was her ticket to do this. And he obliged. So on one trip, he actually brings the old retired Hollywood movie producer to Floriana with him. And they shoot a movie called The Empress of Floriana, starring the Baroness and her favored lover, who was a man named Robert Phillipson. She did pit her lovers against each other, which is a whole other, segment in the book. But it's starring these two, and the plot was reportedly based on a something that the Baroness actually did, which was kidnap a honeymoon couple, and sort of torture them on an island for a while. She was sort of a pirate queen, and the Baroness loved these stories about herself. She liked to embellish and tell tall tales and sort of burnish her mystique. And she knew that spreading these kinds of stories would only make more Americans want to come and visit and see for themselves.
It didn't use we weren't really a mass crush of people coming to stay at her hotel, were there?
Well, I think for the time period, considering most of America was in throes of the Great Depression, I think that anybody who had the means, I mean, it became the pastime. That kind of cool thing to do was to go on these world cruises. If you had the means to do it, it was a way to sort of escape your daily life and drudgery in a country that was suffering. And the people, as many people I think as could afford to do it, did it. And they did have a pretty steady stream of visitors for a while.
And that had to have gotten under the Whitmers and Friedrich, everybody else.
Well, they all were interested in these Americans at this point because, the Americans come, especially during a drought, the Americans were bringing tools and supplies and foodstuffs that they desperately needed. And at this point, too, I think, with relations with their neighbors deteriorating on all sides, this was an outlet for them to get their side of the story out. They all wondered that is the Baronet spreading lies about us, making visitors not want to come and see us. And they would get very, very angry about this,
Mhm. Well,
including Frederick, especially Frederick.
Frederick, whose apparently metal teeth got too big for his mouth.
Well, I mean, to me, that's another funny metaphor for the book. He doesn't anticipate the fact that his gums are going to shrink and the teeth won't stay in. And of course, at this point, Dory is also suffering from medical problems, and they start sharing the steel dentures, depending on who's talking at the moment. And I just don't think there's a grosser phrase in the English language than shared steel dentures. So yeah, it's things are deteriorating on all fronts.
Friend, it's not fiction. It's all true. I said to you so many times, friends, the truth is so much stranger than fiction. It's unbelievable what went on there. And what I want to say is, you did a wonderful job building up the population of this island to a thriving 11 or 12 people. And then bit by bit, and you go down, we start losing people. Did you always wanna do that? Was that always your idea and plan when you started this book?
Well, to me, I mean, the story is the story, right? It's nonfiction. I can't change what happened. So the people do start dropping off. But to me, I did think of fiction. I thought of right away of Agatha Christie's And Then There Were None, which of course is another story about people on an island who start, disappearing or getting killed off one by one. And while not everybody was guilty of murder, everybody was guilty of something. And I think that's also true in this book. And I wanted the chapter titles. I thought it'd be fun to reflect that when the countdown of the people starting to disappear or die or whatever happens, no spoilers. I wanted the titles to reflect that. So we do have, and then there were nine, and then there were seven, and then there were five, and there were however many is left.
We're not going to tell you that, folks. You got to buy the book. This book, as I've said, is the page turner of the year. This book is so good. I couldn't put it down one Sunday afternoon. I just kept reading and reading. It was outstanding, really. Now, Utopia. There's a word which wasn't in the language until Thomas More writes this back in the 1500s, I think.
Yeah.
And then it's brought forward. I don't know if you ever read Lost Horizon with James Hilton, Shangri-La. That's Shangri-La. It's the same thing, except there, a plane goes down, plane crash. They go over these mountains, which like Nepal or Tibet or somewhere. And there is this utopian area, this utopian society. Okay. And what goes on down there and how, and it's like, we are always searching. We are always searching for it. And, I don't know. Are people still searching for utopia? I mean, are you finding anything else about going on right now?
Oh, I think that people are always searching for utopia. And utopia doesn't necessarily have to mean leaving your life behind and going to a desert island. Utopia could be leaving your marriage, leaving your job, leaving a situation that you're just tired of. Utopia is gambling. I mean, going you're the next pull is going to be the big, thing that changes my life. The next lottery ticket's going to change my life. The next horse race is just going to change my life. So I think that in one way or another, people are always seeking utopia in small ways and in large ways.
My wife and I talk about this all the time in your book. We talk about your book and utopia. And she said, Blaine, my utopia is living right here with you in our house and sitting here in the morning, having our cup of coffee in the library, surrounded by books. She goes, like, it doesn't get any better than that for us. So
That's very sweet. I love that.
that's my wife. Yeah. I don't want to go anywhere either, to be honest with you. But well, a little bit on research. Where did your research take you? Did you have to go to the Galapagos? Did you have to go over to Germany? Tell us a little bit about that.
I went to the Galapagos in May of 2022 and spent 5 days on Floriana. First of all, it took 48 full hours to get there. Planes, trains, automobiles, ferries, 2 full days just to get on the island. And I spent 5 days there, and it's just a magical place. I literally got to walk in the footsteps of where these people lived and breathed, and in some cases died, and see the slight remnants of their lives there. And about 150 people live on Floriana now, and they all, everybody I talked to is kind of proud of its history, and rightfully so. I also did visit Frederick's childhood home in Baden-Baden, Germany, on the French-German border.
Mhm.
It's a beautiful home. I also spent a lot of time at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., where some of the scientists have their records, and Hancock's archive out in USC in Southern California. And I was very lucky. A man named Lorenzo Di Stefano donated his archive about this story in 2020, and I'm the first person who really looked at it and used it. Lorenzo was a man who wanted to write a screenplay about the story in the 1970s and actually interviewed a lot of the explorers. And they were very old men at that time. So we got some of the last interviews, and I had access to the materials that had never been published before, and it really made the book richer, I think.
How long did that research take? A couple of years?
Yeah, a couple of years. But I since 2012, since I first heard of the story, I've been collecting bits and pieces, but really began in earnest, and then it took a couple of years.
It's a fascinating story, and you brought us just a little bit about it. We can't give away what's going on because I want people to buy it. This is so darn good. But I got to ask you this: what's next? Are you going to? I know you talked a little bit about another fiction book. Do you have another nonfiction book coming?
Not yet. I want to keep promoting this book because, as I mentioned earlier, Ron Howard has a movie coming out about this story. It's starring Jude Law, Sydney Sweeney, Anna de Armas, and Vanessa Kirby. And let me just say that the real characters in history got quite the Hollywood glow up. These actors are much better looking. but I'm hoping people want to read the true story before seeing his movie. I haven't yet found the nonfiction book that tops this one. So I have to, I'm gonna just keep, living this one a little bit more because I lost 8 months of pre-publicity. So just trying to make up that lost time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, when you say Ron Howard's making a movie, is he gonna have somebody with steel teeth in him, steel dentures? Do you think that?
Oh, that's it. It's Frederick Jude Law's Frederick Ritter, as far as I hear he has steel teeth.
Okay.
I hear that there's actually a full frontal scene with Jude Law, so we have that to look forward to as well.
Oh my. Oh boy, what this exciting stuff here. But you know what? It may be exciting, but there's really nothing better than reading this book. It's called Eden Undone. The author is Abbott Kahler. She's a wonderful author, she's a wonderful writer. I love all of her books. I have them all but one. And you know what, Abbott, thanks so much for taking time out of your day today to join us here on Books and Looks.
Thanks so much for having me, Blaine. It was a lot of fun talking with you.
Well, friends, I don't know about you, but I'll look at pictures of the Galapagos Islands. I'm not going to go down there. Who knows what's going to happen if you go to Galapagos right now? What a great book, huh? What a great author, great book, great story. Unbelievable. And now Ron Howard's making a movie out of this, too. I'll tell you what, folks, it's going to be something. Yep. This is just outstanding. But what am I going to look at? Well, I'm looking at another nonfiction book. It's called I Didn't Believe Him by Irene Daria. Now, I Didn't Believe Him is a story about her son, basically, who was told that he didn't know how to read and was learning disabled. And she goes into the schools in New York, posh schools, very proper and highly, you had to pay high tuition for these schools and other schools, and finds out they're not teaching these kids how to read properly. And when the boy at age 5 comes to her and says, Mommy, when are they going to teach me how to read? She didn't believe him. She said, trust the school. Yeah. She found out that's not the thing you do. And it's what's going on. And it's unbelievable, this story about our educational system, folks, about the sad reading scores that we're seeing year after year after year because kids don't know how to read because they're not being taught how to read properly. And that's the problem. This is going to be a book that is eye-opening. It is eye-opening. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't put it down. That's next week, folks. So anyway, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks saying, may all your leaves be pages of a book.